Welcome to Sounds with Tom Needham and the Sounds of Film radio show, the nation's longest running film and music themed radio show, broadcasting from Stony Brook. I'm your host, Tom Needham, bringing you in depth conversations with some of the most fascinating filmmakers, musicians, and cultural voices shaping our world today. On today's show, we have a truly special guest, Terry Masear, the extraordinary hummingbird rescuer at the heart of the new documentary, Every Little Thing. Directed by Sally Aitken, the film captures Masear's lifelong dedication to rehabilitating these fragile, breathtaking creatures, offering audiences a window into a world of patience, perseverance, and quiet compassion. With its stunning cinematography, deeply moving storytelling, and an intimate look at her work, Every Little Thing is far more than just a nature documentary. It's an exploration of resilience, hope, and the profound connections that we can forge with the tiniest creatures. I want to thank you so much for joining us on the program today, Terry.
It's my pleasure, Tom. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, of course. This is a really special film. Congratulations. I understand that audiences are really responding to it.
Yes, we've been around the country and it's gone to over 20 film festivals and including Sundance and South by Southwest, and it's just getting a very positive and enthusiastic response everywhere we go. We're seeing sold out theaters, so it's really been wonderful.
Well, I should add that locally here, the film is going to be screening at the Port Jefferson Documentary Film Series in March. So, this film captures the delicate and intricate world of hummingbird rescues. How do you feel about having your work documented on film?
Well, of course, anytime you see yourself on film, you're bound to feel conflicted because it's for years I was just doing the work on my own and without any attention, and so when you see yourself on film, it's always a little unnerving. But the positive side is I love that it's getting the word out, that it's educating the public about rehabilitation and the importance to our environment and to our lives.
How did Sally first approach you about this project, and what convinced you to participate?
Yeah, actually, the producer, Tina Dalton, called me a couple of years ago, and she had read Fastest Things on Wings, which is the book that the film Every Little Thing is based on. And she just called me out of the blue and said, "We want to do a film based on your book." And I thought she was kidding around. I didn't take it seriously. And so I didn't really respond. And then, and then she said, "Look, we want to buy your book rights." And I said, "Okay, you can do that." And then she called back 6 months later and said, "We want to make a film." And I still didn't believe it. I mean, who would, why would anybody make a film about this, right? But they did. They pushed on, and we ended up, within a year, we were in LA filming in Beverly Hills. So
Do you remember when you were first contacted about it, like why they were interested? Like what did they envision, and did that vision turn out to be the film that we can see today?
yes, they're a production company that Wild Bear Production likes to do nature films and films about conservation. So they had done Playing with Sharks, which is Sally Aiken directed that, and Wild Bear produced it, and it was an Australian film. They are Australians, which is another reason I couldn't quite believe that they would come to me to do hummingbirds, because they don't have hummingbirds in Australia. They knew nothing about them, and they were clueless. But they loved the story about this person just coming, deciding to do this kind of work, kind of just it wasn't any kind of plan. It came to me very kind of serendipitously too, if you want to use that word. So I didn't plan to rescue hummingbirds, and they found me, and just as the film company found me. So
Can you share a little bit about that part of the story about how they found you?
how the birds found yes,
Yeah.
um, I had an I had an Abyssinian cat who was an indoor cat, and he was supposed to be indoor, but during Santa Ana windstorms, like the ones that caused the fires in LA in January, the very powerful storms like hurricanes, right? He always had to get outside. He would always escape on my husband, and he, nobody knew he was gone because he was so quick. He could just run out before anybody even saw him. And he came back one morning after a Santa Ana windstorm a, a pin feathered nestling that had been blown out of its nest. And he didn't hurt it. He carried it home and set it on the floor, and was like, "What are you going to do about this?" I didn't even know what it was. I was clueless. I grew up in the Midwest. We didn't see hummingbirds, really not at all. I had not even seen a hummingbird, and especially not a baby. So it took me a minute to figure out what it was. But the needle beak is unmistakable, and it was so small. It was the size of a dime. So I'm like, this has to be a hummingbird. And so this was pre-internet. I know nobody can imagine these days, right?
Mm,
Where you can't just jump on the internet and find somebody. But back then, the internet just had advertisements. You probably remember that, right?
right. Yeah.
It was the beginning of the internet. And there were just advertisements, or you just couldn't find anybody. But I called around for days, couldn't find anybody who would take them because they're so difficult to rehabilitate. Nobody wanted him. And finally, I found my mentor, Gene Roper, down in Torrance, a veterinarian, said, "Oh yeah, there's some woman down in Torrance who does this." So I drove him down there, and I walked in her house, and she had 50 hummingbirds in cages in her kitchen. And the
Wow.
entire house sounded like a helicopter. It was just like all day long. And so I left thinking I was done with hummingbirds. Almost a year later, almost to the day, um, a hummingbird. I was watching a nest in a ficus tree right outside my house, and we had a massive rainstorm in 2004. They were the biggest storms LA had ever had. They went on for days, and the rains washed a baby out of the nest. So I was on my way to work at UCLA. I had a wool suit, and I walked out. I was running out to my car, and I see this little baby hummingbird hanging from the nest, and I'm like,
Oh.
oh man, I'm late for work. So I get a 6-foot step ladder. I climb up in this driving rain. We're talking tsunami rain, and dislodge this little bird from the nest. And I put him in my palm, and I walked him back to the laundry room. I figured, okay, he's dead. So I was going to set him down on a paper towel and just leave him there and bury him when I came home. And just before I set him down, his claw just gently rubbed my palm,
Mm.
and he was alive. So I had already had some experience, so I couldn't just leave him there. So I had to call off class, called off my class. And of course, UCLA, they were like, "You're doing what? What are you doing that you can't come and teach?" And that was the beginning. I went back and took him to Jean, and she's before I could get out the door, she said, "By the way, not so fast. How would you like to help out here a little bit and kind of drive for me?" So I drove for 2 years, and then I was hooked. I was sucked in, and there was no escape.
I
I started, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, I love hummingbirds. A lot of people that get the chance to see them are fascinated with them. You obviously were. But for those people that don't quite understand, what is so special about hummingbirds?
Oh, there's just so much, Tom. We could spend an hour talking about this, but I mean, just being in Sedona a few days ago, and just, I mean, people are just enthralled. They run the International Hummingbird Society out of Sedona, and people are just enthralled. 90% of the audience had hummingbird feeders, of the 400 people there, and the way that their flight patterns are remarkable. They can fly straight vertical, which no other creature can do. Straight vertical, sideways, backwards, and upside down. They can hover, which no other bird can do, and they can fly 60 miles an hour on a dive bomb. They have remarkable dive displays. aerial aeronautics that you've never seen before, and they inhabit a special niche in in the environment where they can mine flowers. They co-evolved with flowers, so that the flowers depend on them too. And when the light hits their wings, they appear to be rainbows
Mm,
because they have a special filament in their wings. So there's actually a Brazilian photographer who takes pictures of them, and you'll see it in every little thing. There's an image of a bird flying in a cage, and the wings look like rainbows. And I believe that that's how they see each other, because they can see the ultraviolet range. So I believe that when they see each other, they don't see themselves the way we do. Our perceptions are very flat and kind of dull compared to what they see in the world.
that's amazing. One of the things that's really remarkable about this film is just seeing you interact with them. You have said and you've written that you believe that hummingbirds can give people an opportunity to be compassionate. What is it about hummingbirds and the work that you do that brings out compassion?
Yeah, that's a great question. Southern California has more hummingbirds than any place in the world in an urban area. There are a lot of hummingbirds in Arizona and Mexico, but they live out in the forest, so people don't see them as much. And there's just not the volume. The number of hummingbirds in LA is just staggering, and because they're everywhere, and they're people call me every day. They say I have 200 hummingbirds at my feeders. I have hundreds of hummingbirds. I hear this every day. And so consequently, because they live beside us, they suffer from a lot of injuries and issues that are human caused, like tree trimmers, automobile collisions, window collisions, people cutting nests, people misunderstanding and cutting nests for the wrong reasons. So, but once people, and then of course the babies during breeding season, nesting season, a lot of the babies fall to the ground before they take flight, so they end up in human hands. And Angelinos love their hummingbirds, and when you get this a creature that small and that vulnerable, because before they can fly, they're just, they're helpless. It just brings out this kind of tenderness in people, that in a kind of compassion that is really astonishing to see, because I don't know too many other creatures that can do that to humans so consistently. And they're the size of a penny, and people just want to help them so badly. So
Wow. This film is just as much about you as it is about the hummingbirds. Uh, in the movie, you reveal that um, you did have some tragedy in your past, and you don't have to go into it right now. But I was wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about how the story of these birds um, coming back to a healthy state can be something that is a metaphor for people's journeys in life. This is a pretty deep film, and I was
yeah.
surprised at at how philosophical the film is, and how much feeling there is there. How is us learning? How is the process of us seeing how birds like hummingbirds can heal instructive for humans too?
Well, speaking for myself, Tom, as the film points out, my own childhood trauma um, gave me the ability to read animals in a unique way, and I can really read their feelings. I feel that I can understand them and hear them, um, and in a way that they're kind of dismissed by our culture sometimes. We some The culture kind of dismisses animals. The fact that we have humans and animals, right? Like there's two categories. You know
Mm,
what I'm saying?
yeah.
That are there two categories, or are there thousands of categories? Why is there, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why is there humans, and I don't see that division at all. For me, every species is a category. So I don't see us as separate from quote animals. And I think just because that dichotomy is built into the language, it makes us believe that we're somehow separate. But I don't see that at all, and I never have. I've always, felt that all other species were just as interesting and fascinating as humans and have their own superiority and own qualities, and that we should be more compassionate toward all creatures. And I think the film gives, and especially hummingbirds, because they're so vulnerable and so tiny and so pretty, it gives people, they're kind of the poster children for human compassion toward other species, and they give people the opportunity to show that care and show that appreciation for nature. And it's so rewarding when, because I get 5,000 calls a year, and some people start resist initially. They don't want to get involved because they're afraid it's going to hurt. Or they're afraid, they've never had any experience with any other species, how to care for an animal. And once they do it, and once I walk them through it or get them involved, I get, long texts and letters and just calls of appreciation
Mm,
for, helping them to save this little creature. It really gives people an incredible sense of meaning and feeling for nature and for the world. And I believe it builds compassion for other humans as well, which we certainly need a lot more of that.
certainly, yeah. But one of the things that I also appreciate about the film is that as much as you show compassion to these birds, you also seem very smart and realistic about the realities of nature. And you prepare these birds to eventually be released if they're capable of it. And you kind of indicate in the film that in nature, there isn't really compassion. Can you explain like the realities of nature and what is the reality for these birds once they're gone in some cases?
Well, sure, Tom. I mean, as I point out, when I release them, hummingbirds are extremely territorial and aggressive. But the way I see it is, and they will fight to the death, if, especially during breeding season. The males are powerfully motivated to take over their area. And if that means killing the competition, so be it, they will do so. But in a way, all of nature, hummingbirds and all species included, are really pre-civilization animals, right? And it's the way we were. If you look at how humans were prior to quote civilization, such as
Yeah.
we know it, this is how we evolved too. And because of our higher brain, we did evolve society and laws, and sometimes those don't always work, and the you know fundamental human nature breaks through, and we see what we're really made of, right? And where we came from, and it's kind of disconcerting. But most other species are still in that, pre-civilization um, mode of behaving. Nature is a combat zone. It's hard for us to. We see it as brutality. Other species constantly killing each other for territory, food, and sex. The same things that humans fight over, right?
Yeah.
And but they don't have any laws or mores, nothing to temper those impulses, so they go full bore on those types of things. So it's very violent and very rough, and I try to prepare them. I do prepare them for that. When I release them, they're ready to go to war. They're warriors. They're ready to defend themselves, and they have to be, or they won't survive. But they're prepared. I can see when I watch them if they're ready or not. If they're not, I hold them back. And what's fascinating about hummingbirds, and I think this is with all species, they're all different. Some are very emotional, some are they need a lot of help, they need a lot more care, they're needy, and others are just, they're just independent and leave me alone, get lost, I can do this. And there's everything in between.
I just want clarification about humans. I'm thinking of the book Lord of the Flies, which sort of makes uh, the point that maybe humans are really just naturally kind of like how you were describing the birds, but that because we're civilized, we can mask what our true instincts are. Um, but we are who we are. And do you think that's really the reality, whether we're talking about birds or whether we're talking about humans, that science is science and there's just these genetic realities of who we are as creatures? Or wouldn't you take it that far?
No, I think you're right. Well, I'll tell you why. Nature is, unfortunately, the natural world was set up so that the stronger would prevail and the weak would get destroyed. And, we still carry that with us, but we have set up society to make space for those who aren't the strongest, who aren't able to, fight to the death. But humans can quite easily devolve into barbaric behavior under stress.
Hmm.
You've seen it.
Yeah.
And, when there's extreme stress, you see humans devolve into this kind of competitive, violent type of behavior. But humans are more nuanced, so we often become very helpful and caring during times of distress too. But there are times when I've been in situations, where being stuck on an airplane that's stuck on the tarmac for 4 hours,
Mm,
right? You
right.
start to see people crack,
Yeah.
and you know what I'm saying?
I'm one of
Or if
those.
there's a shortage of, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah.
you really, it pushes you to your basic nature, where you just want to scream and get violent and fight to get out, or you'll see food shortages. There can be a
Yeah.
lot of fighting, but we have evolved a consciousness, I believe, and a different type of brain that insists on cooperation. Humans don't want to admit that we all need each other, but we do. We all need each other, and we need to recognize that. Where nobody's independent. Look at the way you live. Look how many things you do every day that depend on other people. If you start looking at everything you use and the food you eat and the car you drive, everything you do, thousands of people have contributed to that.
Yeah, that's true.
So we need each other, but like I said, under under stress, you can see our basic nature sometimes comes out. And what we hope is that we will evolve further to get past that, so that won't surface. But with birds and with other species, they have never had that type of influence. They will always act violently, but I've seen some tenderness in hummingbirds too, which is hard to believe, but
Terry,
they do care for their young.
not only are you amazing with these birds, but I didn't realize that like you're almost like a psychologist as well in terms of you're dealing with the public, the people who come in with the birds. Um, each of them has a story, each of them has a personality, and you seem very diplomatic. You obviously want to help the birds, but it seems like you've learned a lot about people in the process of doing this for many years. Can you just share with our listeners a little bit about what you typically see when someone brings in a bird in terms of the types of people and the good and the bad sometimes?
Yeah, Tom. Well, I get 5,000 calls a year, so you see the entire spectrum. You see people who just don't want anything to do with it, and they're just, they feel put upon. Some people just call me and they won't help. And then you see people who will do anything for the bird. They'll leave their job. They'll, take the whole day off and make incredible sacrifices to help a hummingbird. and then everything in between. I would say the majority of my callers, just because of the fact that they called, are ready to help, or they want to, get involved. Um, when I wrote the book, I was much younger. Mm, and it was over 10 years ago, and I was greener than I am now. And as you said, I have learned to be a psychologist. I've learned to be more patient with callers, and it's not easy, Tom, because I can get 50 calls a day. So you're under
Wow.
tremendous stress, and you're under time constraints, and everybody wants to talk, and I get that, because they don't know nearly as much as I do, and I have to keep reminding myself of that. I have to be patient, but I do have to cut them off because I've got 5 calls waiting.
Yeah.
But in the book, I do write about, and I know in some ways it came off maybe a little rough, but when people abuse the animals, by keeping them too long or playing with them treating them as a toy, letting their children treat them as toys, it triggers me. And so I have tried to not be as aggressive, but I still feel like I'm justified in being upset about
Yeah.
that, because this is a sentient being that's being starved to death, or hurt or injured by humans who are not, treating it with the respect that it deserves. So that does happen, and those are the hardest ones, because I have to try to control my feelings. And that said, Tom, there's always somebody that's going to push you over the edge. They just won't do the right. They won't do the right thing, and I've learned to walk away. That's all I can do. But it's hard, because I know there's a life hanging there, waiting in the balance, waiting for my help. But I would say the majority of callers are fantastic, and they really want to help. They love the creature. They want to teach their children how to react and interact properly with these animals. So it's, generally it's positive, but you have to. I know rehabbers who have quit because of people, because
Yeah.
they can't deal with the difficult people. So
We already talked about how beautiful and remarkable these birds are, but the thing that is special about this film is that it uses this up close photography, cinematography, that is just remarkable. The thing about hummingbirds is that their wings move so quickly, and I don't know how they got this footage um, when you release the birds, and y-
yeah,
these close-up shots of like before they fly away.
right.
Can you tell me about just like this ability that the filmmakers had to capture these moments, and what we can learn from being able to see something that we can't see with our natural eye that way?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. I mean, the photography does capture things that you will never see in real life. Um, and you would need an expert photographer like Anne Prum, who did the photography for the film, to actually explain the frames per second. They had some phenomenal camera equipment that I don't really understand. But the nice thing about the rehab setup was they could get very close to the hummingbirds, whereas in nature that's not always easy. And then we had the feeders that attracted the wild birds as well. But the rehab birds, you can get right up close to them and get close ups. So they were able to capture their eyelashes. You
Mm.
know, if you saw their eyelashes and the way they blink, and I love, when, because when you release the rehab birds, they're not as fast as the wild adults. So they'll fly up in the air, but sometimes up 100 feet up in the air, and the camera could follow them because they knew where, they come out the door of the aviary and they know where they're going. And there are just I think you're right. I think some of those scenes when they fly up into the sky on their first flight are so phenomenal. And then they were able to get so close with the camera that I love that last scene when Cactus goes
Mhm.
and they show her blinking, and you can see her eyes, her eyelashes. She looks out to the wild, and then she looks back to the aviary, and then looks out to the wild again. Like, okay, it's like call of the wild, right?
Yeah.
I'm going, and this is it. And it was just such a brilliant close up of her just looking back at her old home and then knowing she has to go, that she's a wild creature and has to get out there. It was just brilliant, really,
It's
to
amazing.
see that.
I know you get close to the birds sometimes. Do they get close to you too?
Some of them, Tom, some of them just hate me. I mean, I called, Sniper didn't make it. I had a bird named Sniper. He was a rufous, and the rufous are particularly violent. They're migratory birds that fly from Mexico to Alaska, 7,000 miles a year on a migratory journey. This bird that weighs less than a nickel, and because they're migratory, they have to. They're kind of like the cowboy who rides into town, the stranger who rides into town, and they've got to, make an impact, because if they don't get food because they're
Ah,
constantly on the road. So they have to find food everywhere they stop, and they're also going to encounter other territorial violent birds who live there. So I always see them as a kind of, the Clint Eastwood who ride into town, and they've got to be tough,
right.
because they're not going to get treated with any kind of, you know, civility. They're not accepted. They're strangers, and so they pass on that violent gene, if you will. And Sniper just hated me, and he tried to kill every bird in the aviary, and so I
Really?
had to throw him out early. But yeah, he was constantly trying to kill everybody, and so I swear I would be standing there. I could feel his eyes behind me, like if he could kill me, he would, right?
Wow.
And then others like Pepper in the book. If you read Fastest Things on Wings, she was just such a little Anna's female who had been traumatized as her brother. She was nearly killed by crows,
Oh,
and so she was very traumatized when I got her, and she was very dependent and needy, and bonded with me much more deeply than most hummingbirds do. And some of the males will bond with you too. I had a young male, Annis, who bonded with me during the film, but he didn't make it into the film. Rafa, I also got him as a featherless nestling. And usually what happens is if you get them really young when they're blind, because they're blind for the first several days, they're blind for like the first week,
mm,
their eyes are closed. And if you get them then, they've never seen their mother, so they think you are their
right.
parent. And so those birds tend to bond with you very closely because they don't know who, they've got this giant human parent, right? And they don't, they're the size of your little finger, but they've got this ginormous parent, human parent, and that's who they believe is their caregiver. They don't know what a hummingbird mother is. So those birds will bond. The naked babies, we call them. They will bond deeply with you. But the thing I like about hummingbirds is you can pamper them and love them and caress them all you want. They will never come back to you and imprint the way crows or ravens or mockingbirds do. If you treat a raven the way I treated the hummingbirds in the film, that raven is a dog,
mm,
and you can't make him wild. So it's very dangerous. I tried to do ravens and I had to give them up. I had to give them to a friend of mine because I couldn't give them tough love.
that's so
I'm
interesting.
just too I'm such a pushover. Yeah, but the hummingbirds, you can love them to the ends of the earth. When you let them go, they will never come back and sit on you. They might come back and hover in front of your face, and but some people will call and tell me, Terry, this bird, my hummingbird, that I rescued him from inside the house, and now he comes back and sits on my shoulder. And
Oh,
I say, well,
wow.
I say, you're so lucky. You have a very imaginative life, because that does not happen. They will not do that.
Wow, that's
Now, some
unique.
people can attract them with those handheld feeders. They make handheld feeders.
Hmm.
And if a bird is on a migratory journey and has no other choice, yes, they will come down and sit on your hand. But in LA, they've got plenty of other options, so they're not going to come and sit on your finger or sit on your hand, and imprint the way other birds will. And that's why I chose hummingbirds, because I can't be tough love,
Mm.
like you have to be with most birds. Yeah.
Well, Terry, I could speak to you forever. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. Please tell everybody about your website, the work that you're doing, and your book, everything that people want to learn more about, and how they can learn more about this film as well.
The film is based on my book that was published in 10 years ago now, Fastest Things on Wings. And the you can still buy the paperback. It's still available, and it has a lot of it's like one summer of my rehab work. So it's similar to the film, it's just a different year. And it has all of the quirky finders, and it describes the rehab process, and different birds, different personalities. It just basically has everything. And then I have a website, Los Angeles Hummingbird Rescue. It's very easy to find, and we make it very visible so that as soon as people find a bird, they can call me immediately. And it works brilliantly, because I get calls from people walking down the street or in a park, and they're still on site when they call me. So we can address the issue very quickly and and have an immediate response. And then every little thing, just kind of plays off the book, and kind of shows the whole process. So um, if you read the book and saw the film, you'd be pretty educated about hummingbirds.
Well, Terry, I want to thank you again, and I want to highly recommend this movie to everybody. And maybe we could talk again in the future. I want to hear how this film, once it's out there for everyone to see, um, how this is going to change the way that people view hummingbirds, and maybe people will be inspired by the work that you do, and maybe there'll be other people like you around the world who start to do this good work. Terry, thank you so much. It was really nice speaking with you.
It was my pleasure, Tom. Thank you for having me on.